Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Chicago jazz guitarist and gifted educator David Bloom. He talked about his new 2022 CD, Shadow of a Soul, done with Cliff Colnot. He is one of Chicago's most innovative educators that stimulates creativity in people across all disciplines. He has been an accomplished guitarist and flutist performing in Chicago for many years, and he opened the Bloom School of Jazz in 1975. His jazz as language approach incorporates linguistics, philosophy, aesthetics, and music. By listening to jazz masters, Bloom has taken their musical values and developed exercises that demand those sensibilities. David is a fascinating cat. Enjoy this interview.
Hey, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being interested.
Yeah. I love Shadow of a Soul, and before we get into the album, I want to know how you did through COVID. How did you survive that 2-year period primarily, now that we're kind of coming out of it, and how did it change you?
COVID was, I would say, it was the most creative part of my life ever. During COVID, I was working on 4 different albums. The record, Shadow of a Soul, and the CD that came out right after it called Mirage. Those tunes, with the exception of 4 of them that were recorded afterwards, were recorded between June 18th and June 26th of last year. So we did 30 tunes, and as you can hear, extensive production on many of them. So that was great. And then I also am working on that will be released probably in another 3 weeks, an a cappella vocal group, one of my students who's 82. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, I can. Yeah, it's great.
No, sometimes sometimes I realize I'm doing a soliloquy because of the connection.
Yeah, I get it.
So I just wanted to make sure. So anyway, we have Take 6 also doing one song on this new a cappella CD. And then I have a woman named Jewel Tansey, and I'm doing. We just finished a CD that is not released yet, but we got it back from the printers, and we're doing a lot of PR and stuff. But anyway, so I've been real busy, and also I've written a couple books during the time. I released a book called What Is Soul a couple years ago, and a little book called Before and Aphorisms. It's a little 3-inch by 3-inch book of just little aphorisms that I've thought up from the last 50 years. So it's been it's been kind of weird in terms of not being able to really see people too much. But what I would do is I would ride my bike usually an hour and a half a day, and I would write A sections to tunes and then either finish them or have them be interludes. As you can tell on that Shadow of a Soul record, there's several interludes that are almost kind of like audio palate cleansers. They just kind of set you up for the next tune. And I feel pretty proud about the order of the tunes and the moods, the tempi. I think it works, the way I had hoped it would. And people have heard it, comment on how much they enjoy the flow from one tune to the next. So I think I was, successful in the order of the tunes as well as the length. Most of the tunes on that album, a CD actually, are under, 4 minutes. And a few are, in the 5 to 6 minutes. So I really very much believe in just getting to the point and get out, and don't have, a musical filibuster. And a lot of jazz players just play on and on and on, and it's so self-celebratory. And the real greats know not only how to start the solo, but they know how to end it, and why.
Well, as someone that curates a jazz show, I appreciate that because I like to get as many songs on my show as possible. Now, when I'm live, there's solos and there's things like that going on. I get it, but I think in recorded music, it's like you say. I love that philosophy. I don't want to be presumptuous, but what was it about this time period? Did you never have the opportunity to slow down like you did?
Hold a second. My TV just turned on.
Oh, okay. You're fine.
Yeah, good. Now it's off now.
So I don't want to be presumptuous, but, was it because of the slowing down of COVID you didn't have a chance to slow down like that before? What was the whole impetus behind the burst of creativity?
Well, that's a very kind of complicated question, because then you have to start talking about, what is the, genesis of a creative impulse. That's tough. It's a tough one. But my good friend and producer / arranger often would just call me up, because he was really, really going crazy, because he just stayed in. He didn't go out on a bike or anything. So he'd call me up and he'd say, "Will you please send me some, even if it's 8 bars?" So, I mean, I'm not saying I just did it for him, but in a way, some of those I wrote because, he asked me to write and send him something. And, I feel pretty good about what I ended up sending him.
Along with recording and writing, you got a pretty notable school. Talk to me about your school.
I started at the school. I started actually teaching when I got back from Berkeley School of Music in 1971. I started teaching in 1972. So it's basically, I've been teaching now for 50 years. But I started my Bloom School of Jazz in 1975 in kind of an entertainment district, a street called Rush Street on the near north side of Chicago, right across from a very famous club called Mr. Kelly's. There are many records that were recorded there. So I started the school in 1975, and in 1975, we were just doing ear training courses and private lessons till 1979. And then I started doing some little combos on Sundays, and the response was so great, I started putting these combos in the curriculum, and I've been doing them, since 1979. Long time.
Talk to me a little bit about how this journey in jazz began for you. Back in your childhood, what were some influences? What was your childhood like? How did it make you want to be who you are today?
Well, when I was 9 years old, my family went out to Palo Alto. We were there for a year. My dad was at the Center for the Advanced Study of Behavioral Science. Anyone in education knows of Benjamin Bloom. He wrote Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives that sold millions of copies. And so anytime I meet someone anywhere in the world who is in education, and I mention Benjamin Bloom, they all mention that book. So we were out there, and I started playing. Before we went out there, my mother set up some lessons with the first chair clarinetist of Chicago Symphony, a guy named Jerome Stoll. And he wasn't a very friendly person. In fact, he was just super harsh. And I was like 8 years old, so that didn't work out. And then when I went to California, we found a guitar teacher named Mrs. Schneiderman, and she taught me folk music. So I just started guitar, and then when I got back to Chicago, I continued just playing guitar and singing folk songs with my brother. Back in that period, in the 50s and 60s, folk music was really huge. Pete Seeger and all these, different Gibson and Camp and the Clancy Brothers, et cetera, Peter, Paul, and Mary. So, we would play, but when we got back from California in 1960, across the street, I heard some just incredible music. It was actually Herbie Mann live at the Village Gate doing Coming Home Baby. And back in those days, you just yell up. People were just absurdly more relaxed. Like, for example, on a Saturday night, you'd go to like 4 parties, and the only thing when you walk in the door, people would say beer's in the back. You know, you didn't need like special identification to get into a party. And then at 1 a.m, you'd come back to the party that, you know, you liked the most and stay till 4 or 5. So a very different period. So anyway, the guy was named Jerry Fentress, and he invited me to come up and just played a bunch of jazz for me, and I was just completely hooked on it. I just loved it. I didn't really feel I could play it, but I did. I loved the music, and I fell in love with Wes Montgomery, and later on had a chance to see him 4 times at the Lighthouse out in California. I saw him twice, and at the Plug Nickel in Chicago. And I asked him to play one of my favorite tunes, and he said, "We don't play it anymore. The tune jingles." You know. So anyway, then I wasn't playing any jazz until, you know, the late 60s. I went on a little tour with a blues guy named Chicago Slim, and we went down to Texas. And when the owner of the club saw that we had 2 black guys in the band, he paid us for 2 weeks, and we came back to Chicago. It was unbelievable. That was in 1968. And then I went to Berkeley for a couple of years. You know, further, I had started playing flute at the end of the 60s, so I was playing flute and guitar. And then I went to Berkeley, and when I got back from Berkeley, I started a band right away in 72 with just top players who were all better than I was. But the thing they liked about, you know, being in my band was they liked my original tunes that were not, you know, pretentious. They were improviser friendly tunes. And I've never understood why people, you know, on a one night gig bring tunes that people can't play, or if they can play, it sounds like school because they're not relaxed enough with the chord changes to be able to freely express themselves. Never understood that. I thought it was just insane, you know, to present music that is going to sound very academic at best. Why do that, you know? But anyway, that's just me. You know, I started my first jazz band in 72, a place called Lake Meadows Restaurant, and I had my bands until 1981, and then I just stopped playing out for numerous reasons. One of which was the last band that I had 2 junkies in. One almost died, and I just got real tired of. I mean, it's one thing to battle club owners, but it's another thing to battle musicians. You know, coming in late, et cetera, being high, you know, not having to go find them after the break. I mean, the last gig I had was started at 10 until 3:30 in the morning during the weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday it went till 4:30. You know, so the very different than now. I mean, most bands now feel they're put upon if they have to do more than 2 sets. You know, we're doing 5 sets or 6. And then since then, you know, I've just had the school. I've written a lot of music. I write essays. I have a book I think I mentioned called What is Soul? So I like to write. I'm a fairly curious person, and I like to express, you know, what I think. And I think it was the reason I started school because I remember in about 70 I went for a walk with my dad, and 71 when I got back, and I said, "What should I do?" And he said, "Well, why don't you think about opening a school up?" And I said, "That sounds like a good idea." so because I was teaching about 30 students in Hyde Park, where I'm from, 30 students a week. And then a friend of mine gave up his place on Rush Street, right across from the Mr. Kelly's, and I rented it, and that was that.
I'm curious, with your life as both a musician and an educator, what is it that you look forward to the most every day? What is it about this process that you love the most?
Well, I come from a family of teachers, and I would say pretty much a huge part of the way I judge myself is on the positive effect I can have on others. So when I'm like today, I have a combo later and a couple of privates. I look forward to teaching. I mean, I've been teaching 50 years, and I don't feel it's an imposition at all. I look forward to it because I look forward to opportunities to create high value for other people. So that's pretty much, what's important to me. Now, on the other hand, my own creativity is very important to me too. Whether it's working on, composing or my playing. I also paint. So I have different creative outlets that make life tolerable.
I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it. So let me ask you this. If you have a dream tonight and you run into the younger version of yourself, say in your 20s, and you can dispense, advice based on the wisdom that you've gained over all of these years, what would you tell your young version?
I would say another way to frame the question is, do I have regrets? And I would say there's only very few regrets. One regret I have is, given that my father was a professor at the University of Chicago, it meant that I could have tuition paid for anywhere in the country up to the level of U of C, which was second only to Harvard. So basically anywhere in the country. And if I had gone to Harvard, it was pretty close. So it would have been, my parents could have afforded that. So I'd say my biggest regret is that I pissed away, a lot of potential education that I could have had because I was very rebellious, and it was kind of the shoemaker's kid story, that my dad was a super high level, world renowned educator, and I practiced all day long when I was at Berklee School of Music, but I cut a lot of classes, and I just wasn't into kind of formal education. So that's really one of my big regrets. I mean, I've started doing a lot of writing, essays, et cetera, et cetera. I can see sometimes my writing's improved greatly in the last 20 years. It started off just ranting about things I didn't like, and then the Tribune asked me to write a book review, and I said, well, I'm not really a writer. And then the guy who asked me to do it did it because he wanted me to review Studs Terkel, Giants of Jazz book that was being re-released, excuse me, from 1957 was the original. So I wrote it, and he said that he'd be happy to edit it and massage it. And then about a year later, he asked me to do a book review on Larry Kart's Jazz in Search of Itself. So for this one, I was trying to do like a long article, a la, Harper's. So I wrote 3,200 words and then, cut it down to 900 for the Chicago Tribune. So, I mean, those two writing assignments basically, made me into a freelance writer. I mean, if you're published in a major newspaper in the country and paid, basically you're a freelance writer. So I've really enjoyed. I haven't sent out enough of my stuff to newspapers because one of my big problems is that I have a huge joy of creativity. I mean, I love it, but I'm really, one could call it hubris or whatever one wants to call it, but I've never been big into marketing. I mean, when I was 17, I saw Buddy Guy at the folk festival, U of C, and I called him up the next day and asked him if he'd teach me. and he said he'd never taught anybody, but I convinced him that to take me on, and I said, what would it cost? And he said about $5. And I said, for how long? He says, as long as it takes. And so that was a really very sweet period, taking the train over to his house. And he was just, there's something to say about Southern hospitality, people who not only make you feel like it's okay that you're there, but for, the Southern hospitality makes you feel like it's necessary that you're there. And that's, my mother was that, just making people feel like it's important you're here, not it's okay, that you're here. I've tried to think about that a lot just in terms of my dealings with people, because if you can draw the best out of people if you make them feel like they're important, rather than an extra in your life.
Everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your students, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Great question, by the way.
Thank you.
Who I think I am. I think for me, and maybe this is incorrect, but for me, one of my aphorisms in my little book is behavior is truth. So for me, I take a look at what I do, and what I do is I empower, thousands and thousands of musicians to express themselves. I've been doing that, for 50 years. And so that, again, getting back to what I said, I think I'm a person who I can be very, very harsh in terms of for example, my musical tastes. I really don't take any prisoners. So if I feel people are just fucking around and they're just not really telling a musical story and they're just showing us some diminished licks or something they've just, and it's just reiteration and not creativity, I can be very harsh. And I really, a lot of people get annoyed with me because they see me come into a club and then 15 minutes later I leave. I have no interest in wasting my time if someone really doesn't, in my opinion, have a sincere interest in telling musical stories. And basically it's just practicing, on the bandstand.
David, this has been fascinating. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for giving me a kind of a portrait of what you're doing and where you're going and in your school and your life. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Well, yeah, I have a few things to say about the record, and I think I said one is that I was really trying to go for a very wide, kaleidoscopic, view of grooves, colors and musical stories, and I think I was successful with that. The Shadow of the Soul tune, where I'm playing alto flute on it, by the way, that's also, you can see a very nice video of that, on YouTube. And also the salsa tune that I wrote for Eddie Palmieri. So I would say with the Shadow of the Soul, what I was trying to get to was an appreciation of all the super soulful people I've met in my life who all seemed to cast a shadow. There was a certain richness in their presence, versus people who didn't cast a shadow, who just in a soap ad, there's no shadows. So anyways, that and so with that, I wrote the A section of that in 1975, and I wrote the bridge in 2 years ago, 2020. And I'm really happy with that tune, how it came out, because we have an oboe playing the bridge, and I'm playing alto flute on the A section. And I thought the woman just did an incredible job. So, yeah, I would say the main thing I feel about the record is it's got extremely high production values, really, really good players, good solos, very good arrangements that Cliff Colnot wrote most of, and I wrote we actually co-wrote a couple of them, for Eddie P. that has like 24 musicians on it, 14 strings, 5 horns, and 5 rhythms. I'm real pleased with the CD. It does what I was trying to do.
And a wonderful listen. I can't wait to get it out to the people out there. So thank you again for taking time out. Good luck with this album and everything as we move forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to David for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.